The fire moved like a wild creature tearing through the quiet night in Belo Horizonte, its roar echoing against the buildings as if the city itself were holding its breath. And right in the middle of that chaos, a single voice broke through, steady, warm, and impossible to ignore. That is where the story of Samuel begins, a 27-year-old man who never imagined his faith would be tested in the heart of a burning inferno. But before we step deeper into that moment, let me speak directly to you. Hello, friends of Tales of Faith. Welcome. Shall we walk through this journey together? Samuel's life felt like it was collapsing long before the flames ever reached that building. He had lost his job unexpectedly, argued bitterly with his father, and drifted away from the church he once loved. Everything seemed to fall apart at the same time, leaving him feeling empty and unsure of who he was. Yet there he stood that night, facing a burning apartment complex while a child screamed for help inside. And in that terrifying instant, Samuel realized something powerful. Sometimes life calls us precisely when we think we have nothing left to give. Now picture this. If it were you standing there, watching a desperate mother beg for someone to save her child, what would you do? As the smoke thickened and the heat pressed against his skin, Samuel heard something that changed everything, a voice that did not belong to anyone around him. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't panicked. It was calm, close, almost familiar, and it said, "I am with you." Something inside him lit up again, not courage born from adrenaline, but something deeper and far more powerful. Even before he took his first step toward the burning door, he knew this was not about bravery. This was a calling. Samuel had never seen himself as a hero, and if anyone ever hinted at it, he would laugh it off immediately. He was an ordinary young man trying to survive the weight of everyday life, late bills, strained relationships, and a faith that had grown thin after too many disappointments. He still lived with his mother in a modest apartment and jumped between temporary jobs after being fired from the last one due to a heated argument with his boss. That night, he was simply walking home after another exhausting day when something in the air felt wrong. The scent of smoke was thick, almost metallic, and as he turned the corner, he saw a crowd gathered, their faces lit by the glow of flames reflecting off the building ahead. But it wasn't the fire that made Samuel run. It was the desperate cry of a child echoing from inside. He didn't know the family. He didn't owe them anything. Yet something deep within him tightened, a pull he couldn't describe. When he reached the front of the burning structure, he saw a mother on her knees, screaming for help, her voice breaking as she begged for someone, anyone, to save her son. People kept their distance, frozen by fear, their eyes filled with helplessness. And I want you to imagine this moment. If this unfolded right in front of you, with a child trapped behind flames, how would you react? As the mother's cries echoed, Samuel felt the same voice from before, calm, steady, unmistakably present. It wasn't a hallucination born of panic. It was a presence that pushed the fear aside and filled him with a sense of direction he hadn't felt in years. He looked up at the smoke-filled windows, his heart beat fast but strangely anchored. The voice whispered again, not loud, but powerful enough to steady his legs. "Go." And just like that, Samuel moved. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He simply stepped toward the doorway engulfed in heat, guided not by his own strength, but by something far greater. The moment Samuel stepped inside, the heat wrapped around him like a living force, pressing against his skin and clawing at his lungs. The air was thick, heavy with smoke that scraped at his throat, but he pushed forward. Memories of his childhood church services surfaced unexpectedly, his grandmother's voice telling him that God speaks even in the storms, even in the fire, if only we are willing to listen. Now, in that suffocating hallway illuminated by flickering flames, Samuel understood those words in a way he never had before. Each step felt guided, steady, as if an unseen presence walked beside him. "Do not fear," the voice whispered, a whisper strong enough to silence the panic trying to crawl into his chest. The corridor ahead was long and dark, lit only by the orange glow of the spreading fire. Samuel cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Hey, where are you? Can you hear me?" His voice echoed, swallowed by the crackling of burning wood. For a brief moment, doubt pricked at him. What if he was too late? What if the child had already? But before that thought rooted in his mind, the voice returned, firmer this time. "Keep going." So he did. The heat intensified, wrapping around him like a cloak of fire, but the conviction growing inside him was stronger. And then, faint at first but unmistakable, he heard it, a soft, trembling sob coming from the far end of the hall. He wasn't imagining it. The child was still alive. Samuel's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination as he moved closer. calling out gently but urgently. At the corner, curled up against the wall, was a little girl, no older than 6, her face streaked with soot and tears. In that moment, Samuel felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not panic, but purpose. Before we continue, pause for a second and reflect. Have you ever faced a moment when everything seemed to collapse, but something, someone, kept you moving forward? What did that moment teach you? Because that's exactly where Samuel stood now, staring into the terrified eyes of the child he was meant to find. The little girl stared at Samuel with wide, tear-filled eyes, her small body trembling as if the smoke itself was shivering through her. She looked so fragile, so helpless, yet the moment their eyes met, something deep and unspoken passed between them, an instinctive trust, a silent plea. Samuel crouched down slowly, keeping his voice as calm as the chaos around them would allow. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm here to take you out, okay? You're not alone anymore." He reached out, and after a hesitant moment, she stepped toward him, clutching his shirt with tiny fingers smudged with soot. The ceiling above them groaned, wood cracking like thunder as embers rained down in bright sparks, forcing him to shelter the girl with his arms. He lifted her carefully, wrapping her against his chest and covering her face with his shirt to shield her from the smoke. But when he turned to retrace his steps, his heart sank. The hallway he had just used was now swallowed by a curtain of flames, a wall of fire roaring like an angry beast. The girl whimpered, burying her face in his neck, and for a brief instant fear tried to take hold, whispering that there was no way out. Yet before panic could root itself, the voice returned, gentle, clear, and undeniably real. "I will make a way." Samuel glanced to his left and noticed a door partially open, revealing another narrow hallway he hadn't seen before. It wasn't safe. It wasn't certain. But it was the only path left. With the girl secured in his arms, he pressed forward, ignoring the burning heat that bit at his skin. Every step felt like a battle against the fire itself, yet an unexplainable peace anchored him. The building creaked and shifted, threatening collapse, but the voice guided him like a compass in the dark. And as he moved through that unfamiliar corridor, risking everything, one thought echoed in his mind, a thought he wouldn't fully understand until much later. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen not where we feel strong, but where we feel most afraid, and still choose to believe. The further Samuel walked into the unfamiliar hallway, the more unstable the building seemed to become. The floor vibrated beneath his feet, trembling like it could give way at any second, and the smoke swirled in thick waves that blurred his vision. He tightened his grip around the little girl, feeling her tiny heartbeat racing against his chest. "You're doing great," he whispered, though his own lungs burned with every breath. The corridor split into two directions ahead: left, where the smoke seemed heavier, and right, where the darkness stretched deeper but the air felt less suffocating. Samuel paused. He couldn't afford hesitation. Time was running thinner than the oxygen around them. And yet, in that tense silence, something remarkable happened. The voice spoke again, not loud, not hurried, but firm with purpose, to the right. He didn't question it. He turned, stepping into the darker path, trusting the unseen guidance that had brought him this far. But as he advanced, the girl tugged weakly at his shirt and pointed toward a door on the left, coughing as she tried to speak. Samuel leaned closer, and in a broken whisper she managed to say, "My brother. He was with me. He got scared. He ran that way." Samuel froze. Another child. Another life. And suddenly, everything inside him twisted. If it were you in this moment, holding one child safely in your arms while knowing another might still be trapped somewhere in the smoke, what would you do? It's the kind of choice that splits a heart wide open. For a moment, Samuel felt the weight of fear, the pressure of responsibility, the terror of making the wrong decision. But then, just as doubt threatened to swallow him whole, the voice came again, gentle, steady, undeniable. "Trust me." Samuel looked at the girl, her soot-covered face pleading through the dim light. He exhaled shakily, knowing he couldn't ignore her. He pushed open the left door carefully, shielding them both from a burst of heat, and stepped inside. Whatever waited for them in that room, fear, danger, or even another miracle, Samuel knew he wasn't walking into it alone. The room Samuel stepped into was barely visible through the layers of smoke drifting like dark curtains across the ceiling. His eyes burned, watering uncontrollably, but he forced himself to scan the space. The walls were cracked, the windows shattered by the heat, and debris lay scattered across the floor. The little girl held onto him tightly, trembling as she whispered her brother's name. "Felipe." "Felipe." Samuel kneeled for a moment, setting her gently behind him so he could move more freely. "Stay right here, sweetheart. I'll find him," he said, his voice firm but soft enough to keep her calm. He reached out in front of him, using his hands to feel through the haze, calling out, "Felipe, can you hear me?" Silence answered him first, an eerie, heavy stillness broken only by the distant crackling of flames. For a second, a cold fear pricked at Samuel's spine. What if they were too late? What if the boy had collapsed somewhere out of sight? But before that fear grew teeth, he heard it, a faint tapping, like someone knocking weakly against wood. Samuel turned toward the sound, pushing his way past a fallen piece of ceiling. There, wedged between a collapsed shelf and the wall, was a small boy curled into himself, coughing and trying to shield his face. Relief hit Samuel like a wave. "Felipe, I'm here," he said, dropping to his knees and clearing debris with trembling hands. The boy looked up with wide, terrified eyes, whispering, "I can't move." Samuel assessed him quickly. His leg was pinned beneath a broken plank. He braced himself, pulled hard, and with a grunt managed to free the boy just enough to scoop him into his arms. But as he stood, something deep inside him stirred again. The voice, closer this time, as if standing right beside him, "You are not alone." Holding a child on each side now, Samuel could feel the weight, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, overwhelming in every way. The building groaned louder than before, a warning that time was vanishing fast. And so I ask you, if walls were collapsing around you, and 2 innocent lives depended on your next choice, would your fear stop you, or would your faith push you forward? Samuel already knew his answer. With the children clinging to him, he turned toward the doorway once more, ready to face whatever waited beyond the smoke. As soon as they stepped outside, the girl's mother rushed toward them in tears, wrapping her daughter in an embrace so tight it was as if she feared losing her all over again. People around them stared at Samuel with a mixture of shock and awe, as if he had done something impossible, and in many ways, he had. But Samuel knew this wasn't about him. It was about the voice, about something far greater than anything he could take credit for. The firefighters arrived minutes later, finishing off the flames and clearing the crowd. One of them walked over and asked, "You went in there alone? How did you make it out of that hallway?" It was completely engulfed. Samuel couldn't respond. He simply looked back at the building, still releasing thin threads of smoke, and felt hot tears slide down his cheeks. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't put any of it into words. What had happened in there wasn't human. It was divine. And he knew it. When everything finally calmed down, Samuel sat on the curb, feeling the weight of the entire experience crash onto his shoulders. He was trembling, not from fear, but from something he couldn't name. The little girl, now safely held by her mother, looked at him from a distance and waved her tiny hand. He smiled back, though his heart felt far too full for him to speak. And then, for the first time since childhood, he prayed, really prayed. Not a memorized line, not a hesitant attempt, but an honest conversation with God. "Why did you speak to me?" he asked silently, fully aware that he wasn't imagining it. And the answer came, simple and unmistakable, as clear as it had been inside the flames, "Because you are still mine." In the days that followed, Samuel noticed his life shifting in small but meaningful ways. He went back to church, reconnected with old friends, and began serving in ministry again, quietly, consistently. People kept calling him the hero from the fire, but he rejected the title every time. He wasn't a hero. He was simply someone who listened. And that had changed everything. He started visiting the girl's family often, forming an unexpected and heartfelt friendship. Her mother always told him, "You saved my daughter." And Samuel would answer, "I just followed a voice." Deep inside, he knew he carried a new purpose, a new fire, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that lights the way. One day, on his way to work, yes, a new job had opened up for him almost miraculously. Samuel overheard someone asking a group of young people at church, "How do you know when it's God speaking to you?" He smiled, because he already knew the answer. God speaks in silence, in chaos, in fear, in joy, and yes, even through flames. He speaks in 1,000 different ways, but always in a way that reaches the heart. And in that moment, Samuel realized that what had happened wasn't just a personal miracle. It was a testimony, a story meant to be shared. That's why you're hearing it now. Samuel chose to use his experience to strengthen the faith of others, sharing his story in small groups, services, and prayer meetings. And every time he finished, someone would ask, Weren't you afraid?" He always answered, "Yes," but fear didn't speak louder than the voice that called me. That sentence stayed with everyone who heard it. Over time, the story spread throughout the community, inspiring young people, encouraging families, and reigniting faith in those who had long stopped believing in miracles. And here we arrive at the heart of this story. It wasn't the fire that changed Samuel. It was the voice that found him when he felt lost, unworthy, and distant. The voice that held him when everything around him seemed ready to collapse. The same voice that speaks to me. The same voice that speaks to you. Maybe not through flames. Maybe not in a moment of danger. But he speaks. He always speaks. And you, have you ever heard that voice? Have you ever felt God calling you even when everything around you felt burned to ashes? That's the question I leave with you. Samuel's story beautifully echoes the truth found in Isaiah 43 verse 2. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. This verse doesn't promise a life without trials. Instead, it promises presence, God's presence, even in the fiercest moments we face. Just as God stood with Samuel in a literal fire, He also stands with us in the emotional, spiritual, and invisible fires that threaten to overwhelm our lives. Another verse that shines through this narrative is Psalm 46 verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. When Samuel heard that voice, it wasn't imagination or adrenaline. It was divine help, real, present, and powerful. And this same God continues to speak today, guiding us, strengthening us, and restoring us when we feel weak or alone. Samuel's experience reminds us that God's voice is not reserved for perfect people or perfect seasons. He speaks to the broken, the tired, the uncertain, and the lost. And when He speaks, everything shifts. Let's pray. Lord, thank You for Your constant presence, even when everything around us feels unstable. Give us ears sensitive to Your voice and courage to obey it, just as Samuel did. Strengthen our faith and renew our hope. Amen. May this story strengthen your faith. Share in the comments what you would do if you were in Samuel's place. Subscribe to Tales of Faith and join us for the next story.